for men who are just coming into that formal mental health care, they are taking a phenomenal step in being vulnerable, right? They're taking, a chance on something. So it is so disheartening if you think about it for someone who has been maybe kind of far away from mental health due to stigma or whatever it may be. And then they sit down, and they finally get something off of their chest. And then the person on the other side is basically, okay, let's fix. I could never imagine just looking at someone after they, lay their heart out on the table and saying, all right, now let's fix X, Y, and Z.
Good morning. Today is March 7th. I have the pleasure and privilege of speaking to Dr. Select Jessica Sellers. She is getting her DSW in social work. And the reason I wanted to bring her on, she is a Army National Guard veteran, married to a Navy veteran. And the fact is that her dissertation, please correct me if I'm wrong, is about really bridging the gap between community care providers and veterans.
Yes, it is really focused on improving how community care providers can interact with veterans and how that really impacts everyone in the long run. Yeah.
So, what made you decide to look at such a niche area?
So, whenever I became a social worker in the very beginning, when I was interning, I was very focused on children and adolescents. And something that happened was we had this program where I was interning, and it basically is a pilot program that pretty much connects veterans to a neurobiological intervention for PTSD. So when my supervisor figured out that I was a veteran and she was looking over my resume, she was like, "Hey, this might be a cool thing for you to kind of get into. Maybe just try it out." So did not have any intention of going into that direction, but definitely after my first interaction with a veteran, just on the social worker side, it definitely changed my route. So the thing that really stood out was this was a man who was, he was elderly at this point, but he had spent, over 40 years trying to find someone who understood what he was talking about. He was tired of going to all of these intakes and having to explain anything and everything. And so I did not self identify as a veteran. But eventually, he just kind of paused and he was like, you were in the army. You were in something, you had to have been. And, that just really increased that rapport, and, long story short, I was able to kind of find out some things that no other therapist had been able to because he didn't have that comfort, he didn't feel like he could be understood. So, after I graduated, still at the same organization, I started focusing more so on VA referrals. So, we are a certified community behavioral health clinic, so we get these VA referrals, and there's a lot of them, right? So what I really started noticing was people were coming to me over and over again talking about, "Hey, I've been involved in mental health for all of these years." We have people who've been seeking mental health for 20 years sometimes, and I've never done actual therapy. I've just talked. People want me to talk, and they just want me to explain everything. So it really kind of made me think about how veterans are interacting with community providers who are wasting very precious time in reaching healing because they're having to have these people explain X, Y, and Z, or they're paying attention to the wrong things. So, really, just the work that I do now really got me interested in how do I prepare other providers because I can't be the only one, right? Like, I can't be the only person that these VA referrals are seeing, and I can't stomach the thought of other people going to community care providers. I've gone to a community care provider. I believe every therapist, especially if you're dealing with trauma, should have your own provider. Um, I've had instances where, after that first session, like, I'm out. Like, you've lost the game, like, you've lost me. And so just really focusing on that has been a real interest of mine.
So, the question I have too, because you're looking at it from the provider side, because they're the ones that are in the control. Have you also looked at it from the flip side of, because it was saying about 57% of men after the first time they go to a therapist, they're just done. They actually walk away from it. Have Do you know of any research that has, or people have worked on an entry level to get into therapy? Like, hey, this is what therapists, or how this is how therapy looks. Because I know for myself, trying to talk to a therapist, I didn't even know where to start. And when they started to pull on certain things, I wasn't even ready or willing to share because one, I felt like I was going to traumatize them, or two, how was it going to be received of you coming from a, because I pretty much only saw them here in America, except for the ones I saw over in Japan. They were like, "Thou shalt not murder." Our morality is based off of this. And how do we have a person that's able to sit with us when we have done some egregious things?
Right. I completely get what you were kind of laying down there, because something similar had happened when I was getting trained in EMDR. So this is something that is very common, and it's something that therapists and social workers really have to, kind of lay a foundation for in the beginning. So whenever I was getting trained for EMDR, obviously I was the guinea pig, and that was my first time experiencing EMDR. And something that I had noticed was while I was processing, I was holding myself back. Like there were things that I was not saying because I was thinking about the person on the other side. I was thinking about the person who I did not want to traumatize. I had worked on a COVID unit a few years after I got out of the National Guard. Um, and so just like you, it's like, okay, how do I say these things? How do I let this out and let someone be a part of that? Like I don't want you to have that picture in your head. And what's really important though is for practitioners to be able to lay that foundation to make the safe space, right? There's going to be times where, people become very open and they feel safe enough to do that. They feel like there's not that judgment. But then there's always going to be times where, in that therapeutic alliance, that therapeutic attunement, you're going to have people who don't want to hurt you, whether that looks like, giving you those bad images in your head, or even if it's, I don't want to be judged for X, Y, and Z. But really and truly, the most important thing to do is really start building that rapport early on. And just, like I said, laying that really strong foundation. Um, and also, like, having lots of different options for veterans who might not want to share all of the nitty gritty. So whether that be private writing, whether that's, while we're processing, maybe a veteran says something very broadly, and then they have a few moments to internally kind of, look at your therapist and kind of think of what you would like to say, but you would like to keep private at the same time. So there's just so many ways to go about it, and everyone is so individualistic. But yes, you are absolutely right. It's so hard for people to open up when they don't know if what they're going to say is going to cause some kind of moral harm or judgment.
So the reason I bring that up is I heard a lot of people when I was working as a peer specialist, and when I was working for a peer specialist for the VA, and I really feel like it's one of the most cost benefits for the VA positions. I would tell them where we were talking, and they knew my background because being a veteran, and I would tell them, "Hey, I'm a former Marine," and depending on what they need to know about me to be able to have that type of engagement, they would say, "Hey, I can't talk to them because I don't want to bother them." And I said, "Dude, my job is for me to convince you to get kicked in the dick over and over again so that you are actually able to allow yourself to heal." And the second thing is, their job is allowing you to spread all your information in front of them. Let you air it out, to look at it, to change it up, to be able to clean it up, have a different relationship with your past traumas. And the therapist is there to help guide you through it. They can't pick up your clothes, they can't pick up your baggage, but they can actually help you reanalyze what's going on. And it changed a lot of their relationships with the therapist in a good way. The other thing that I think about too is So my therapist that I see now, I know a lot of people that see him personally that are my friends. And I think he's the only therapist that I have seen people super proud about to say, "Hey, this is who I'm seeing." Normally, what I've actually been taught over the years, therapy is supposed to be this like sacred bond. It's kind of like almost like marriage. It's like you don't talk about what's happening behind closed doors. And these guys, most of them are combat veterans, and they're just like, "Hey, I see this person, and this is what we talked about." And they want to get the coffee with other people afterwards. They want to engage. They're not trying to share coffee notes, but they're actually just trying, or they're not trying to share therapy notes. They're trying to share a relationship notes. And it's very fascinating to me because that's the type of connection I believe that creates this type of healing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Um, it's not, people kind of get together and they say, "Oh, well, I talked about this target or I talked about this right here." But honestly, I've had plenty of clients who kind of refer their friends and, what you're describing, I get it. It's not like people are, like you said, able to just go over their notes together, but it's like, "Hey, here is this person. We've worked on something positive. I want you to know that we've worked on something positive. Maybe you can too." That's always been such a thing, like on my end. I've always had so many people that kind of call up and they ask for me by name. Um, and in the veteran space, that's everything, right? Because veterans aren't gonna bullshit. They're gonna tell people, "Hey, this is somebody that can be trusted. This is someone that can help." And so for them to come to me, like just the first time that that happened, honestly, and I knew that people were getting together, they were talking about, "Hey, man, you need help." That was probably one of the proudest moments of like my first year in social work.
It's it's actually really it's like a privilege when we start having those when we have those relationships with people, that privilege. And then we're going back to that your dissertation of these are some of the words like IED or looking at PTSD or moral injury or these phrases or acronyms where it's like, I want to be able to flow through the state and have this conversation with you, this dialogue. But I feel like it's becoming very fractured because every time I stop, I have to explain it to you.
Mhm.
And it's like, "Hey, I lit up a vehicle that was a VBID." What's a VBID? A vehicle-borne IED. What is that? What's an IED? It's an explosive improvised explosive device. So what can it be that? It could be a 155 round that's hooked up to a pressure, to a push button or to a frequency or what is that? And then it's like, are we actually talking about me or am I actually giving you a class on what is happening overseas? And we can I know it was like a specialized type of group of people, but also at the same time, I feel like that's in a lot of other areas, just like if you get into LGBTQ area
Mhm.
and understanding about how different lesbians are on the spectrum of being lesbians, there's different gay men are being on a spectrum of it, or people with kinks. Like I had the privilege of my undergrad take an LGBTQ course, and I was like very fascinated. But being willing to take the extra homework to be able to get into that type of dialogue, to be able to sit with a person that is now trying to spill their metaphoric heart out that to you.
Yeah. It's definitely, um, one of those things, right? Like you don't want to have to sit and explain yourself plus give a history lesson while you're in therapy, right? Like that time is sacred, right? You get an hour maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. Like that time is important. But it's really, looking past just, the terminology, right? Like there's so much that goes into it that a lot of providers just aren't supported in at all. Like you get the crash course, Oh, what is a TBI? Oh, what is an IED? But how much does that actually stick, right? If you look at the training that a lot of these providers get, if they actually complete it, it's not going to be very in depth and it's not going to be something that's going to be easily retained. If we're looking at just what, the government accountability office, they reported last year that even though like over 50% of VA mental health is going to these community care providers, only 2% of those providers took even one cultural competence course between 2021 and 2023. That's like almost like nothing. But it's kind of like, okay, we have this information that's out there, but it's being underutilized. And it's kind of trying to figure out why. Is it because everything that is presented is underwhelming, right? Like, obviously, nobody likes death by PowerPoint. However, there's an ethical responsibility to be competent in the work that you do.
So I agree, because like the death by PowerPoint, and I'm not trying to just jump right there. The death by PowerPoint, when we have a person talking to us, and then we have a slew of information that's up on the screen, we are multitasking. For people that believe multitasking is great, or they say women are better at multitasking, really what it is that you're keeps fragmenting your 100% thought from one to the other, and you keep actually having all these fractures, so you're not able to fully understand it. And the cultural competency, and so I'm a little bit bitter about the subject, and I'm not trying to be, because when we just look at data, when we look at pure like data, it really strips away the emotions from the people.
Mhm,
And we can actually say 77 to 80% suicides are completed by men. We can also say men are 57, the first time a man goes into a therapist's office, 57% of the time they'll just stop going to therapy right after that session. But what are we actually missing behind it? What led a person up to suicide? What was the connection? What was the community? Well, they are ending their life by firearms, which is a high portion of it. And well, firearms have to be the solution to it, because we're only looking at the data. And if we go beyond the data and we actually look at the human connection, the community, the relationships, the way to be able to humanize the emotions, to be able to have those organic conversations where people don't feel so alone. Now we have to actually dive into the competency of the people that we are living with. And if a person doesn't know how to talk about X, or they don't know how to talk about Y, then all of a sudden it creates this barrier. And it's also on our job or our duty to be able to increase the dialogue or the education for the person that we are speaking with, to actually normalize, hey, this is hard, but now let's actually take it a step further. Sorry, my little soliloquy on PowerPoints and how they really missed the mark in my eyes.
no, I 100% agree. Um, if we're thinking about like adult learning theory, that's not doing it. That's not, providing any kind of relevance for, people who are taking those trainings. There's no relevance, there's no peer dialogue, which is important. We are social creatures.
Hmm.
Like, we gotta have that. Like, it's just like, obviously, multitasking might be a little different if you're doing things in a group, but if there's all these different things that are going on, like the peer dialogue, really intentional moments for reflection, you have moments that maybe during this training as a whole, you're doing all these different things, but it's each thing that you're doing, you have that moment to just put your attention to that one thing.
Yeah, it's when we're actually allowing ourselves to have that attention to that one thing, we're able to sit with a person. And this actually goes to what therapists are supposed to, and I'm using the word supposed to, or the way that I understand that we're being trained to do, is to empathetically witness to a person, to listen to them, to be able to hear them, to be able to, I don't even want to say validate them all the way, understand their emotions. part of therapy is they might actually have this emotional belief that has created this, but the logic of it is not computing. And where we can honestly say, yes, I hear that you are sad or frightened. And I also hear that, like, you are looking at it from your logic brain of this doesn't make sense. And being able to sit with a person that's even confused himself to be able to witness what's going on. I think it's actually very important.
Yeah. It is definitely just, there's not every time that you sit in a session and people are in there because they want answers, right? It's literally just, I want to say the things that I've held in for how many ever years, and I just want someone to hear. I want somebody to see. I want somebody to see me. And I think that's a big part of, why a lot of male veterans don't stay in therapy long. You know, for men who are just coming into that formal mental health care, you know, they are taking a phenomenal step in being vulnerable, right? They're taking, a chance on something. So it is so disheartening if you think about it for someone who has been maybe kind of far away from mental health due to stigma or whatever it may be. And then they sit down, and they finally get something off of their chest. And then the person on the other side is basically, okay, let's fix you now. Like, just let somebody exist. Like, let somebody breathe. Like, people are not going to therapy necessarily to always be fixed. They just want to be sometimes seen and heard. Maybe working on things comes later, but I could never imagine just looking at someone after they, lay their heart out on the table and saying, all right, now let's fix X, Y, and Z.
It's how many times have you have been granted the pleasure of somebody just really exposing themselves mentally to you, not physically, but mentally to you, where they were just like, hey, this is some of the areas that I'm finally letting this wall down and I'm finally crashing. And it's just like, I'm just super grateful that you have been able to give me this space. They might not even be able to give you those same type of verbiage. You're from Alabama, and it's those guys over there, those men, they're created a little bit differently than a lot of other folks. Like, those are some rough individuals in a good way, in a very good way, not in a bad way. When you're allowing themselves to be exposed to you, and they're like, hey, this is what's been happening. This has been some of the hardships because to be truthful, like a lot of the Southern boys, at least in my brain, they learn how to adapt and overcome. And they've been adapting to this fracture in their life for quite some time. And when they have adapted to their fractures for so long, it becomes part of them. And now them exposing themselves. How do you, what do you do when you're actually now just letting them sit with it?
So it just really depends, right? Sometimes that wall comes crashing down and it's relieving. Sometimes it comes crashing down and it's terrifying, right? Like, they don't know what to do with this, right? Especially if we're thinking about, people whose emotions have been just so just purposefully numbed, for years or whatever it may be. Um, sometimes they kind of naturally kind of go into this state of like spontaneous insight, right? They're able to kind of see, what they've just said, like these emotions that have came out and where their logical brain does not really match up. And so sometimes once that wall comes down, they're able to kind of do some of that work just speaking out loud. Um, but then, sometimes it's okay, this wall has came down. We're not working on anything right now except for making sure that you feel safe and that you can get to some kind of state of calm. Because believe it or not, um, there's some exercises that I do on the EMDR side that are just those very introductory exercises, right? Um, it's just resourcing. It's just, hey, here's your safety net for when we do start processing, you have a skill to kind of help you get back to calm. So a lot of men whenever we do these exercises, and it's literally just a safe space exercise. It's, doing a body scan, recognizing what is the thing that you're feeling, and then maybe transforming it. Those exercises can be so overwhelming to men because when they allow themselves to recognize, when they allow themselves to feel, it's very foreign, and it takes some time to kind of build up some strength in that, to understand that it's not a scary thing. But yeah.
When do men or when do the veterans come across you, typically when they start seeking out therapy?
Do what? Sorry.
I'm sorry. So when do guys or when do yeah, let's say when do guys actually really start looking for therapy? Is there like a certain type of scenario that creates this?
So it just really depends. The majority of people that I see, like I said, are coming from the VA. Some of them are just looking for a new med provider, right? So I don't do meds, but where I work, if you want your medication, you have to additionally see a therapist. Um, so a lot of times, guys come in and they're just kind of like, yeah, I'll see you once every 6 months. I just need my meds. And then all of a sudden, like they're seeing me every 2 weeks, right? Um, or, sometimes people come in because there's issues at home, right? They know that the wife is fed up, or they really want to build a better relationship with their kids. Um, Sometimes they get people against their will. Uh, so outpatient commitment orders, stuff like that. I have people that are coming in at literally all stages. Um, but like I said, men, um, honestly, men come in when they're leaning more towards desperation and they know that they need help and they know that they cannot do it on their own.
So I know that you are not a licensed clinical yet, but you have your LMSW, licensed master social work, and you're working on your DSW. And I'm just curious about this because I've seen this in for myself personally, and I've seen this with other veterans and other guys like myself. Is there a way that we can be able to revise the suicide prevention plan, especially for guys that have not been building that type of connection and creation between them, like a safety plan? And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of times when things start failing in their home, when they're asking for help, the the true confidant has became everything, which is usually their partner in that situation. Like, is there a way that we can actually help reduce or likelihood of reducing suicide attempts if we actually implement a different type of safety plan, or like calling 988 together, or calling doing dry runs with their friends or family that they put on there?
Mhm. Yeah, and that's another thing that's just super individualistic, right? So, where I work, we have a very set in stone framework for safety plans. I don't necessarily like the framework, so I work with it, and then we do additional work to kind of um, supplement, if you will. So, one of the problems with safety planning, especially for veterans who may be living in new communities, maybe the only people they know are the people they live with, literally their wife and kids, right? Um, a lot of problems with safety plans is it puts a lot of emphasis on, who are you going to call? Who's going to come help you? Who are your support people? Well, when you don't have any support people, that's going to make you feel like a bigger piece of shit, right? Like, that's just how it is. Like, I'm not gonna sit across from someone who is so desperate that they are honestly thinking about taking their own life and remind them that they don't have anyone they can call. So it's really kind of thinking outside of the lines, thinking kind of off the screen of the safety plan. What does this veteran need, right? Are we missing purpose? Are we missing social support? So how can we additionally throw that in with some of these resources, right? Um, so, I keep a lot of veteran resources handy because we're always going to have veterans who don't have the support that they need that most mental health organizations want on a safety plan. So it's just really supplementing.
So is Alabama as pro-gun as Montana, would you say?
We are very pro gun. We've actually just had a organization and a program that started. It's called Safer Together. Um, so there are various spots that are opening up in Alabama where if you would like to put your firearm somewhere safely, there's like gun shops that veterans can go to and essentially lock their firearms in like a safe. So that's being done, in an attempt to kind of limit access to firearms whenever, people are in crisis, but also eliminate some of those barriers as far as, okay, if I give my firearm, to this guy or this guy, I'm not getting it back. I'll never be able to buy a gun again. So it's really trying to get around, the stigma and barriers of that. But yeah, Alabama's like super pro gun. Like we got like a shotgun, an AR-16, and a bunch of pistols. We Guns are fun, right? Until they're not, until they are really like just not appropriate to have in your possession. And I'm very, very adamant that if we have things that are going on and we have people who aren't going to give their guns to anybody, like we got to come up with another plan.
So the reason I bring this up is Montana under Senator Tester before he got beat up by Sheehy. So Senator Tester did a bill, and I usually never talk about politics. He was actually the only person I was going to vote for. If I was going to vote, I would have just said no to everybody else and only voted yes to him because he was a farm boy. He might be a liberal, but he's a farm boy. The thing that he wanted to do was very similar to what you just talked about was hand over your firearms to your friends, to a gun shop, to a support agency. Cool. When you're ready, just ask for them back. We're not going to make you jump through the ringer. We're not going to make you actually try to show your competence because competence, depending on who's looking at it, they're going to understand it differently. And no offense to this field, like, I'm going into this field. About 77 to 80%, or is it 87 to 90% of clinicians in the psychotherapy realm are women, and this is a very left-leaning field, so if we are actually we are using our competencies based off of our political biases, because those are some things that we don't like to always fully admit, that we say, "These are some of the things that skew it." Men, especially high rate veterans that are high levels of males, like, they just don't wanna hand over their firearms because they're gonna lose their ability for, 1, protecting their family, 2, being able to hunt, 3, being able to protect their animals, their livestock, and it's interesting to me because that's why I wanted to ask you, but I'm super glad that Alabama did something similar to it.
Mhm.
And I believe that this is a conversation about veteran competency that we should have, because trying to put people into a nice little box, like my second time I was overseas, I used to have a 9 mil pistol underneath my head fully loaded at all times because of I lived with Iraqis. I had to be ready to go at a moment's notice. And coming back to the States, they can say, "Hey, you're home now." But the fact is that even though you live in a very safe place, if you look at cultural competency, I don't have my buddies. I
Mhm.
don't have the people that to my left and right actually watching my six. And if I don't know how to articulate what the demons are inside me, we are missing a huge component of that communication, that interaction.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Um, you're gonna have, like you said, there's gonna be like political biases that come into play, especially when therapy is involved. Um, I've heard some stuff, like I'm not gonna lie, like I've heard some stuff, especially when it comes to veteran gun owners. Whether they're reaching out for mental health. Um, I've heard of veterans who called, 988 or a mental health practitioner and, instead of really going about things in a calm way, in a safe way, a lot of these veterans have been treated like they're criminals
Mhm.
because they are contemplating taking their life and they have a firearm. And so I've had people be, yelled at by, you know, people on the other end telling them, take your gun apart right now, take your gun apart. Why are we stressing people out? Like that seems to be like the common theme. And I don't know if it's because we have so many, providers that are, getting anxious themselves and maybe they're kind of underperforming because of that. Um, but it's just always so much. Like I think the worst thing that you could do is freak out when someone is calling you and they're desperate and they have this weapon in their hand. And I don't know, it's something that has always really bewildered me. Um, one thing that I've always suggested is, you know, give your buddy your firing pin. If you don't want to give up your gun, like if you feel safer knowing that you have that, just because it's not taken away, give somebody your firing pin, give
Mhm.
somebody your bolt, something. But it's so crazy. Because everybody has so many different ways of going about all this stuff, right? There's some people who just think that if you have mental illness, you shouldn't have any kind of weapons. There's people who think just guns are bad. And a lot of that bias kind of shows sometimes, and it's kind of not okay.
So I'm gonna give an example, but I'm not gonna give any identifying features of the person. And I had the privilege of talking to him, and he's a friend of mine now. And he was not only a person I helped out, but he became a friend. And our relationship changed after he trusted me in this singular moment of time. And I called him up because I had a group going on. And I asked him, I said, hey, I would love for you to come to group. I just wanted to be able to double check. And when you care about a person, you could tell about their rate of speech changing, their cadence are changing, the voice inflection, how they're emphasizing certain words. And when I was talking with him, I noticed he was off. And it was just post an anniversary for him. And he's an older guy. And I said, hey, do you mind if we call 988 together? And he was like, well, I trust you. If you think this will help me, cool. So I said, hey, do me a favor. Hang on. Did a three-way call with 988. And I said, this is so and so. Do you mind if we do a dry run? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, I want to actually just rehearse this just in case something actually happens. And he allowed himself to expose himself to them. And in this moment, he his intentions right before I called him was actually on his way to end his life. And he didn't trust himself to be able to share certain parts with his family, and it changed up the relationship. But that man right now, he's living a great life, or a way better life, and he allowed himself to change the relationship with his family by asking for help, by telling them about what was happening. And it took a lot of encouragement, and he's a very strong, independent dude. I love the guy. I really do. I really value him as a human. And maybe that might make me a bad social worker one day because I care about him too much. But if we don't have somebody that's able to walk us through of saying, hey, I'm in a critical situation. I don't even know what to expect. If you're going to start yelling at me, I'll tell you right now, if that 988 operator started yelling, I would have disconnected him. But they talked it. We built a safety plan. We got him extra help. We connect them with additional resources. When we're looking at these interactions with adjacent mental health providers that are there to help us out in the critical situations, can we explain what a crisis situation is differently than only thinking about a suicide attempt? Or could it be, because he even said it could be a bad night terror. It could be about the urges of wanting to do self-harm to himself or to a person, to wanting to use because they actually need to escape. And what I believe is that if we start having these type of dialogue with people, yeah, we might be using 98 more than what they intended for. Less money needed to go into the police. Less money needed to go to acute psychiatric. Less less money needed to go to the other areas. And if we're able to reduce the services that are high level cost to actually lower level cost, I believe we would be doing a huge benefit to the people that we're caring about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really frustrating for me, when people do have to utilize things like, mental health crisis units or, going inpatient when that's not really what they need because they don't know what resources they have. Like they don't know, like you said, like they don't know what's going to happen if they call 988. So a lot of people don't, but it can be that lifeline that kind of helps them bring them back to some kind of like calm or understanding or being able to have, someone that convinces them, hey, this is something to call, your mental health professional about. I cannot tell you how upset it makes me. Like, a lot of people going into, inpatient facilities feel very hurt, feel very like disappointed in themselves. And so I try to make people understand, that they have options and that we have other lifelines in our communities, whether it's just literally calling 988. Because sometimes, there's so much more than you need than to just go inpatient and then have someone tweak your meds and then kind of pop you off, you know? There's so much more that can be done meaningfully than that, for sure.
Because, like, the acute psychiatric, and this is my understanding, it's a place to get you stabilized. It's not a way to heal you. And if we are using an acute psychiatric area as a place to heal, not be stabilizing, we are missing our communication points. Also, we are mismanaging our resources to be able to help out people. And we are mismanaging the ability of, well, if a person is now starting to feel more and more helpless because they're not getting their services, because they are keep pressing on this button and is not actually able to provide it, I feel like it creates this more likelihood of wanting to walk away. And like, so I wanted to get back to the original point of like the cultural competency. How do you feel? And I know you talked about it a bit, but how do you feel that it will be like kind of like a penny poor but dollar rich approach about the community providers and being able to help out the veterans?
So I really think that just, kind of like what you said earlier, about, the data shows X, Y, and Z, but what's the story underneath? The latest, annual suicide report from the VA, 61% of veterans who died by suicide in, the year preceding their death did not receive any care from the VHA, right? Some people might look at that and think, "Mm, okay, they weren't receiving anything at all. If they weren't going to the VA, they weren't getting anything." I don't buy that, and I really wish that the data could have kind of expanded upon that because there's more to this story, right? You cannot tell me that 61% of those people did not have opportunities in their communities where someone could have been a lifeline, right? But a lot of community providers don't have the support or understanding of how they can do that. There's so many people who honestly believe that when it comes to veteran issues, that's the VA's problem, right? I'm just here to do exactly what it is that I need to do that is within my scope, just bare minimum, and the VA has the rest. Can't happen. It just can't happen. Um, but there's just so much that goes into, like when we think about community providers and veterans, right? You're going to have some people who love the fact that they have a veteran in their office, whether you're at a mental health clinic, whether you're at a doctor's office, and you have people who are so motivated to make sure that these people get the best treatment that they can. But sometimes what their perception of when it comes to the best treatment isn't necessarily culturally relevant, right? So it's really just looking at these disconnects. Um, there's a lot of fragmentation, right? There's a ton. I could literally write 100-page paper just on this. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, there's so much that goes into it.
So I'll tell you about what to me when I think about the warning signs for vets. So when I was lived back in Long Island, New York, I had one veteran. No, I had one therapist that really kind of broke me a little bit, in a good way. He was a Vietnam vet. He was a social worker, and if I remember correctly, he had MS, and his body was eroding on him, and I wasn't going to see him much longer, and I only got to see him for a little bit of time. This is also coming from a person that thought PTSD was the common cold. I came back from Iraq my first time. I thought PTSD was a common cold. They had me see some doctors over at Leicester, which is over in Okinawa. He went to a different unit, snapped on some people, was able to get my way, went back overseas, saw some people. They're like, here's some medication. And the reason I bring up this one guy that was a Vietnam vet, I don't remember what he said. I just remember him providing the room to allow me to hear a little bit of his own struggles. He didn't do the exact way of, "This is how a social worker is supposed to act. Everything is about you." He gave me a little bit about him because he realized that's what I needed to trust him. And then there was another one, her name is Tara Brunswick, and if she gets mad at me, cool. I love that lady, she saved my life. Um, and I say it in the sense that sometimes a vet, just like how I was, we don't know how to even use therapy, but we sure definitely know how to send a damn email saying, "Hey, I need you. Can you make time?" And she used to give me her lunch break to show up. Sometimes that's what we need
Mhm.
because we don't know how to sit in a friggin' office. We don't know how to explain what is going on. And if we actually try to put everybody in a cute little box, it's very similar to the colorblind racism approach. We are totally missing the individual for who they are and trying to meet them where we believe that they are. So I definitely agree with you. We do need more cultural competency when this comes into play.
Yeah. Especially when you think about like intersectionality, right? Like, yeah, we have all of this kind of generic veteran cultural competence info that kind of gets sent out. But for the most part, there's not a lot of training that people get concerning like, intersectionality, right? So we have, this veteran right here. He's a dad, he's trying to be that protector, he's trying to be that provider. Okay, we have to also look at that portion, right? Not every session is going to be, tell me about your time in Iraq. You know, it's not going to be that.
Yep.
But also, so many people, veterans have so much diversity, right? It's understanding that the veteran that is sitting across from you is not just a veteran, right? They might be a black woman, right? Her experience is not just going to be defined by the fact that she's a veteran, right? All of these intersecting, identities kind of come into play, and that's being greatly ignored. We definitely have to stop looking at, those dominant narratives and attaching that to people. Like, we have to look at the whole person for sure.
I think that's what social work does a really good job about. They look at the person and environment instead of just one label.
Right.
And I believe honestly, the more times that we have dialogues about connecting and humanizing the type of relationships around therapy, because like quite a bit of the people that listen to my podcast are veterans, and like I've talked to people about psilocybin. People have done psilocybin retreats, to people that talk about theology, to people that share their stories. It's like so many people I've learned from. The individuals are scared about even opening up this Pandora's box, their own self Pandora's box, because it wasn't fully role modeled to them as kids of how to delay that gratification or be able to sit inside that suffering, to be able to identify for what it is and being able to recategorize it. So, Dr. Select Jessica Sellers, what it has a nice little ring to it. So it's gonna be Doc soon.
Yeah.
What are some of the words of advice that you would like for people to hear from you and about from either from the veterans or from the males or just in general for mental health?
Ooh, that is super broad. Ooh. Mm. I think my biggest advice, right, is like we all have comfort zones, right? We all have these places where we're comfortable and that we kind of stick to. But honestly and truly, like comfort zones are really constriction zones. It takes, reaching out and making that really uncomfortable step to grow, right? Like we have to keep growing. So a lot of times, if people are feeling like they're in their comfort zone because they're not addressing the things that need to be addressed, that's your sign. Like you need to take that step out. Like, please, if you are thinking about therapy, do it. It's going to feel uncomfortable at first. Like, we're not given, a guideline, right? Oh, I'm going to start therapy today. I'm going to feel this and then I'm going to feel that. We're not going to get that. But if you can really think about just knowing that the distress and the discomfort of kind of opening up, that's not a forever feeling. So just really kind of like I said, step out of that constriction zone. Like that's how you grow. You do not grow without discomfort.
Well, I want to say I appreciate your service. I appreciate your husband's service, and I'm grateful for the continued approach of wanting to help people out in these type of areas.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out with me on a Saturday.
It was definitely my pleasure. I enjoy these type of conversations.
Yeah, me too.
How do you feel